So, hello everyone again. This is lecture 1 part 3 of dual nature of radiation and matter. In this lecture we will start with the photoelectric effect, that is the third point. So, in the previous lecture we completed the introduction in the electron emission, in which we got to know why was there a basic need for the electrons to be imparted, how were they imparted, what are the different variations. There were basically 3 variations. So, we got to know about those results. Today let us start with your photoelectric effect. So, I am Samir Lavankar. Let us begin our discussion. So, a course outline for you. Right now we are on the third point here, that is photoelectric effect. So, introduction is being done and electron emission is being done. Let us start today with the photoelectric effect. I will go very slowly on the photoelectric effect, make you understand very basic concepts here. Okay. So, photoelectric effect. So, before going into the major portion of photoelectric effect, let us move on. Let us start with some of the experiments which led to the photoelectric effect. Okay. So, first were Hertz observations. So, basically the scientist Hertz did some experiments and there were some other discoveries, there were some implications which we got to know about after his results. Okay. So, let us look over to those observations first. So, the phenomena of photoelectric emission was discovered in 1887 by Heinrich Hertz during his electromagnetic wave experiments. So, the experiments are being done by electromagnetic waves, but an effect which was based on electron emission etc. were being observed here. Okay. So, in his experimental investigation on the production of electromagnetic waves by means of a spark discharge, Hertz observed that high voltage sparks across the detector loop were enhanced when the emitter plate was illuminated by ultraviolet light from an arc lamp. What I try to say is, we will not go into much detailing of those observations. What I try to say is that when he was trying to produce these electromagnetic waves, he was trying to calculate the value of voltage at some point of the another, but this amount of voltage was being increased. There was a high voltage spark, please remember it was a high voltage spark, as in for some duration of time the value of voltage was being increased, right. This voltage was being increased only and only when in the portions when the ultraviolet light was being illuminated on the emitter plate, right. So, when the emitter plate was being illuminated using ultraviolet light, then these high voltage sparks were being observed, right. Okay, let us move on then. Light shining on the metal surface somehow facilitated the escape of free charge particles, which we now known as electrons. Okay. So, basically what was happening is that due to ultraviolet light being illuminated on this surface, electrons were being emitted, and because these electrons were being emitted, the amount of current increased. Due to the amount of current increase, voltage also increased. Okay. So, this thing has also been explained. Next is your okay. So, light shining on the metal surface somehow facilitated the escape of free charge particles, which we now know as electrons. So, basically what happened was the amount of free electrons which were on the surface of the metal were being escaped out of the metal surface. Okay. When light falls on the metal surface, some electrons near the surface absorb enough energy from the incident radiation to overcome the attraction of the positive ions in the material of the surface. So, this is just the photoelectric emission concept which we understood in the last part, last line, right. So, basically what was happening is, because when the ultraviolet light was being illuminated on the surface, there was an increase in the radiation energy, and due to which the amount of attractive forces by the charge, by the positive charge being accumulated were very less than the amount of energy which the charge which the electron had to escape from the metal surface. Okay. So, when the light falls on the metal surface, some electrons near the surface absorb enough energy from the incident radiation to overcome the attraction of the positive ions in the material of the surface. Okay. After gaining sufficient energy from the incident light, the electrons escape from the surface of the metal into the surrounding space. So, what is this sufficient energy? We will get to know in subsequent slide, but for now we can understand that after that amount of E is being observed or being reached, then at that point this electron will get shoot up from the metal surface. Fine. Okay. Now, let us move on to the next observation. So, basically this was Halbwachs and Lenard's observations. So, what is happening in this? Let me go very slowly. So, Wilhelm Halbwachs and Philipp Lenard investigated the phenomena of photoelectric emission in detail in 1886 to 1902. Lenard observed that when the ultraviolet radiations were allowed to fall, please remember every concept means majority of the initial observations or initial experiments which were being computed, which were being experimented, were based upon the emission of an ultraviolet light only. Why was there a need, or why was there a reason of using ultraviolet light? We will get to know in subsequent slides, because of the frequency, because of the wavelength, etc. But for now, just you can just see over the, just you can look over to the mindset of the scientist which was working at that time. So because they were also doing for ultraviolet light radiation only, they were also doing for ultraviolet radiations only, because to get the result much more accurately, or to get the result very, we will have a satisfaction that the as a person, as a scientist, I am getting the result. That's why they were using ultraviolet radiations again and again. Okay. So this thing has been explained. Next is that Leonard observed that when ultraviolet radiations were allowed to fall on the emitter plate, so when was allowed to fall on the emitter plate of an evacuated glass tube enclosed in two electrodes, circuit flows in the circuit. Okay, current flows in the circuit. So basically they are just saying two plates, evacuated glass tube, and you try to connect it, you can see that the if you pass a galvanometer through it, you can find the current is passing through the complete circuit. Okay. So this thing was observed. So basically photoelectric effect again was observed. Only till that point they did not know to define that sequence. In the later slides, in the later experiments, finally this phenomena was being explained as photoelectric effect. I will try to define it in the subsequent slides, but for now what we got to know, that these ultraviolet radiations led to current being dissipated in the complete circuit. Okay, let us move on then. So as soon as the ultraviolet radiations were stopped, current flow also stopped. Quite evident, because if you cut this process here, then there will be no emission, of electrons, and as there will be no emission of electrons, there will be no current passing through it, because in current electricity chapter, in electromagnetic waves chapter, we got to know that due to passage of current, passage of electrons from point A to point B, that constitutes an electric current. Also we define I is also equal to Q by T only, where Q are negatively charged particles. That is fine. Okay. So this thing has been explained. So as soon as the ultraviolet radiation was stopped, the current flow also stopped. These observations indicate that when ultraviolet radiations fall on the emitter plate C, as you can see, this is called as emitter plate C, right? Electrons are ejected from it. Quite evident, as you can see, electrons are quite evident, means as in we can understand this because something is happening from the illumination of light. So what was being observed, people tried to explain it, he tried to explain in this sequence that electrons are ejected from it, which are attracted towards the positive collector plate A by the electric field. Okay, so this thing is happening, this is positively charged plate. Okay. So this thing is explained. Next is the electrons flow through the evacuated glass tube, resulting in the current flow. Electrons flow through the, so passage of electron leads to the constitution of electric current. So the electrons flow through the evacuated glass tube, resulting in the current flow. So hence as we know that I is nothing but equal to Q by T, as with the passage of time there was a dissipation, or there was a production of charges, there was a movement of charges from, let us say, point A to point B. Here charges are negatively charged particles, and generally electric current constitutes negatively charged particles movement only. So as there was a movement of charges, electrons from point A to point B, hence there was a current being observed in the circuit. Okay. So this thing has been explained. Next is, thus light falling on the surface of the emitter causes current in the external circuit. So finally what we can say, that if you like work in the process, that if a light is being emitted, or if a light is being illuminated, then that leads to current being evolved in the circuit, right? Okay. So Helvox and Leonard studied how this photocurrent varied with the collector plate potential and with frequency and intensity of incident radiation. So this is the only concept which we will get to know. We will try to release the factors, we will try to change one factor and keep another constant, and we will get to know different variations of how this photoelectric effect leads to the potential differences, potential variations, current variation, and so on. Okay. Next is Helvox in 188, as you can see of the this dates also. So this is around 188, means just before the discovery of electrons. So, till this point when the experiments were being observed, electron discovery is not taken place, because if I am not wrong, the electron discovery took place in 1897 or 1895 when the J.J. Thomson coined the term electrons, right. So, even before the discovery of electrons, the study of electrons were being explained, were being dealt with, just they did not know that these things are called as electrons, or these things are negative charge particles, which we will denote as electrons. Okay. So, Helmholtz in 1888 undertook this study further and connected a negatively charged zinc plate to an electroscope. So, he tried to do something more. What was the result? We will get to know here. So, he observed that the zinc plate lost its charge when it was illuminated by ultraviolet light. Fine. You can understand it by your sequences also. So, what is actually happening? What would have actually happened here? Let us suppose this is that zinc plate. Let me make it much more clearer. Okay. So, let us suppose this is that zinc plate. Let us suppose these are the charges being explained here. So, let us suppose these are, as it is given that it was a negatively charged zinc plate. So, let me write here. So, fine. So, what would have happened if the ultraviolet light was being illuminated on this zinc plate? These electrons with time would have got out, depending upon their capacity, depending upon the electron volts required, right. So, at some time t is equal to 0, these electrons were in very higher sequence. At some time t is equal to t1, what would have happened? These electrons would have gone to 0, and hence the amount of charged, negatively charged zinc plate would have led to uncharged negatively zinc plate. And at some time t is equal to t2 also, there would have been a sequence occurred in which the amount of negatively charged particles in the zinc. Okay. So, what is happening at t is equal to t1? The amount of negatively charged particles inside the metal surface is equal to the amount of positively charged particles inside the metal surface. What is happening at t is equal to t2? The amount of negatively charged particles has gone much less. Why? Because there was an illumination. Due to that illumination, so one of the thing is constant that during this time t1 and t2, the ultraviolet light was being illuminated only. Okay. So, what is happening in t is equal to t2, that the amount of negatively charged particle has gone down and positively charged particle has gone up, as in the relative amount has gone up. Therefore, because there wasn't an addition of positive charged particle, only the relative amount was being changed. Then this negatively charged zinc plate has converted into positively charged zinc plate. Right. So, these were the different experiments or observations being observed when the experiments were being performed. Okay. So, let us look over here. So, what is being written here? So, further the uncharged zinc plate became positive. Okay. So, he observed zinc plate lost its charge. Quite evident, will lost its charge only because it is negatively charged particles and electrons are being emitted out when it was illuminated by ultraviolet light. Further, the uncharged zinc plate became positively charged. Quite evident, as the relative amount of positively charged particle increased and as the negative charge keep on decreasing, therefore, it became positively charged zinc plate. Further, the uncharged zinc plate became positively charged when it was irradiated by ultraviolet light. Okay. Positive charge on a positively charged zinc plate was found to be further enhanced when it was illuminated by ultraviolet light. So, as we keep on going, so let us suppose I write at t is equal to t3. So, at this point would have happened, negative charge would have gone much less, positive charge would have been intact only, but because of the relative values, because of the relative decrease in the value of negative charge, there was no such negative charges present which were being cancelling the amount of positive charges. Hence, relatively positive charge keeps on increasing, and due to this increase, what happened was the amount of positive charge intensity on the zinc plate increased with time t. And please remember, during this complete timeline, there was always an irradiation or illumination of ultraviolet light on the metal surface. From these observations, he concluded that negatively charged particles were emitted from the zinc plate under the action of ultraviolet light. Quite evident, because please you can understand it at any sequence. Let us say you take any bowl, and if you put it with you keep on using a vacuum pump, so that amount of air is being passed inside it, right. So, there would be a time, let us suppose this is being filled up with, let's say, small pebbles. So if that air is being interacted apart, there will be a time when the amount of pebbles will keep on losing. Understand those pebbles at negatively charged particles only, and as the amount, and let us suppose positive charged particles air. So there will be a time when the amount of negatively charged particles or pebbles will be very less, and the amount of air will be much more, right. So this is only the analogous thing which I can explain very easily. Okay. So after the discovery of the electron in 1897, it became evident. So 1897, what happened was, J.J. Thomson coined the term electron. So after the discovery of the electron in 1897, it became evident that the incident light causes electrons to be emitted from the emitter plate. So before 1897, it was being called as negatively charged particles. Then after J.J. Thomson coined the term in 1897, these negatively charged particles were called as electrons. Fine. So that was your complete Helmholtz and Lenard's observations, and this is your this was your Hertz observations. Fine. So till now, what we understood from these two observations is that first of all, in the Hertz observation, that there was, due to the ultraviolet radiations, and electrons were being emitted which were responsible for the electric circuit to take place, electric circuit to complete, and hence there was a production of electric current. Why was there production of electric current? Because we know that electric current constitutes only and only when there is a passage of electric negatively charged particles from point A to point B. So if there was a production of electric current, that means there was a movement of charges, and there was a movement of charges only and only when there was a passage ultraviolet light was being illuminated. Hence it was being proved, or hence it was being observed, that when the illumination of ultraviolet light is happening, then the current is taking place. Fine. In the second experiment of Helmholtz and Lenard's, final conclusion was that, let us suppose take the example of zinc plate only, that zinc plate was first initially negatively charged particle, and when the amount of time increased for the illumination by the ultraviolet light, this negatively charged zinc plate led to the positively charged, first uncharged, and then to positively charged, and then to highly positively charged. Okay. Let us move on with the discussion further. Now, due to the negative charge, the emitted electrons are pushed towards the collector plate by the electric field. As you can see, quite evident, because the electron, because this is positively charged, and hence there will be attraction of this electron towards the positively charged plate. Okay. So due to the negative charge, the emitted electrons are pushed towards the collector plate by the electric field. Helmholtz and Lenard also observed that when ultraviolet light fell on the emitter plate, no electrons are emitted at all when the frequency of the incident light was smaller than a certain minimum value called the threshold frequency. So now new term is known to you. So in the previous concept, in the previous part, we got to know about the work potential. Today we got to know about threshold frequency, right? So that was called as phi naught. Now this is frequency. So please remember these stuff, because these are the minimum things which you need to remember. That was for minimum energy part, this is for your frequency part, right. So what we got to know today, that there is some threshold frequency. That threshold frequency is such that the emission of electron is only and only possible if the emitted ultraviolet light has a frequency which is greater than the threshold frequency. Why it is happening, we will get to know, but for now you can just remember this as something called as threshold frequency. Okay. So this is the definition of threshold frequency. This minimum frequency depends on the nature of the material of the emitter plate. Fine. Okay. So let me stop it here only. The explanation, below explanation, I will try to explain the next chapter in the next lecture only, and then we will move on with the experimental study. Okay. So in this lecture, finally we got to know about threshold frequency, and we got to know about the Hertz experiment, and one more Helmholtz and Lenard's observations, right. So basically what is happening is, very basic stuff is that there is some illumination of ultraviolet light, due to which the electrons are being imparted. These electrons are being passed through the plate, because these are positively charged particles. Quite evident, there will be an attraction, due to which a circuit is being completed. Okay. So then let me stop it here only. I will try to start the discussion further in the next class. Okay. So the course progress for you, we started with the introduction, in which we understood the dual nature of radiation and matter. Basically why was there a reason to understand this chapter, why was there an emission, what were the different experiments being performed by different scientists at that time, even before the discovery of electron. Then in the second point of electron emission, we got to know why was there a reason to understand the process of free electrons being imparted from the surface to the outside area. Why was an energy required, what is the electron volts, what is that potential, and then there were 3 ways. We got to know about these 3 ways through which one was through heating, thermionic emissions, second was field emission using an electric field, and third was photoelectric emission. Then we just put a photoelectric emission and we got to know about the photoelectric effect. The definition part I will try to convey in the initial portion, so that there will be a fresh start of the photoelectric effect again. I will try to revise the photoelectric effect a little bit in the next lecture, and then we can move on further with the experimental study of photoelectric effect in the next lecture. Okay, so let me stop it here only then. So thank you so much.